All right, so let's kick off today's meetup with going through the agenda. So we'll start with the product updates from Max. I know you all love that part. I know you all love this part of the meetup, and Max loves it too. We have Omar, who will take you to a journey with bugs and logs. Well, not literally. Omar will talk about logging in n8n and how you can enable it. We'll then have a small Q&A where I'll ask your questions to Max and Omar. So don't forget to share your questions in the chat. Automation can help you balance your mental health. And Chris will talk about how automating simple tasks is beneficial. A lot goes into making courses, and Tanay will talk about the automation side of the beginner's courses for n8n and show you some workflows that we have built internally. And lastly, we will have office hours, where again, you can ask your questions to our speakers or the team. Now let's move on to our first talk. Max, the head of design at n8n, loves sharing the upcoming features. And not taking too much of his time, I'm handing over to you, Max.
Thanks so much, Harshal, for that warm introduction. And hello, everyone. Feels like only yesterday we were in the last meetup. Time flies. So we've got a lot of stuff in progress at the moment. I'm excited to share some updates. Of course, we've been releasing various nodes and bug fixes. If you want to check that out, you can always look at the changelog in our docs. But this is kind of a bit more of a high-level view. A lot of the big things that we're working on right now are currently in progress. So I don't have so much to share since the last time of things that have been released, but there's some really exciting things on the horizon that I wanted to chat about briefly today. So one of the first things that we're really excited about at n8n, I think it's going to be really empowering for our product team to be able to make smarter decisions, is telemetry and core. So what does that mean? Right now, for self-hosted instances, we really have absolutely no visibility on even the most basic things, like which nodes get the most errors, etc. And at the same time, obviously, since we're self-hosted products, its privacy for users is very important to us, right? So we've started engaging the community and discussing what might lightweight analytics look like on self-hosted instances. And I think when we were thinking about this at n8n, we think there's many examples of doing it the right way. For example, Mozilla Firefox, etc. There's plenty of very privacy-conscious organizations that still get the information that allows their product teams to make the right decisions on how to improve the product. And so what we've done this week to start engaging the community is we've posted a community forum post. There's a type form on there. I'm going to share that in the chat now, so you can go check that out. And we can get your thoughts in there. And thanks to anyone that has already submitted this. We're getting some really great ideas on what, basically on your opinions on privacy and how we can balance that with getting the right insights. I think when we talk about insights and analytics and etc., what I find is if you're in product team, you sort of know how you use that sort of data. But if you're not, it's sort of this big black box. How does it get used? So I wanted to quickly touch on the kinds of things we'll be able to do, even with very basic analytics. So some of the things that we'd be looking to capture, for example, what are the most common errors generally? And same thing for specific nodes. So if on the HTTP request node, we see a very large uptick in a certain type of error, that's a very actionable thing where that day, that week, we can, with engineering, figure out how do we improve that. And that could be a very small change, but something that would be very difficult to do right now and take a lot longer to figure that out. So that's definitely the kind of thing that we'd like to be able to do with this data. Another really basic thing is which nodes are getting used the most. You know, if one node is getting used 100 times more than another node, we should probably dedicate more resources to making it better, going deeper in functionality, and making it more useful for all of you. And another example of a very specific thing that we'd be able to do is if you're typing in the search box in the nodes panel and lots of people are searching for a specific term, getting no results, we might be able to add an alias for that because it's actually a different kind of node. And so we have that functionality, you're just not able to find it yet. So that's exactly the types of things that we'd like to empower our team to be able to do with this, with these insights. And right now, as I said, this is sort of a bit of a black box. So I think with this rolled out, we're going to be able to make far better decisions and really focus on the things that you're asking for by virtue of how you're using it and maybe the problems that you're running into or just the things that you're using the most. So again, I've shared the link. Please do check it out. Please do be a voice if you have any concerns about this. We want to make sure to do this right. We want to sort of have this Mozilla way of going about it. I think they're an organization that's very well respected for their privacy, and they still get to make intelligent database decisions. And of course, with whatever we're considering launching, you will be able to turn it off via environment variables. So if you're in a very security conscious use case or something, you'll be able to completely turn that off, and that's totally fine. We're just happy using n8n. So that's telemetry, and that's something we're really excited about on the product team. I think on that feature, it's going to start off with these conversations. So we really solidify what the scope of that will look like, and then we'll work on sort of rolling that out. Another thing that's been in progress for a little bit now that's currently undergoing UX review and a sort of polishing and tuning up is the weight node, which I briefly discussed last time. I just want to touch base on that again, because I think this is a node that I'm very, very excited about, the use cases that it empowers. In a nutshell, what it lets you do is pause your workflow midway, for example, for extended periods of time. So in a very simple mode, you could say to pause for an hour, you could pause for a year. But another mode of it that I'm really excited about is the webhook mode. So imagine you have a series of nodes. When it gets to the wait node, you can wait until a webhook URL is triggered. That node will give you a URL that you can use in your third-party app or even another workflow, which is going to be very exciting for a lot of asynchronous cases. And especially, I think it's going to make n8n a great tool for use cases in marketing and business processes, where sometimes you might need to wait on a different system or a human step, which could take 10 minutes, it could take 10 days. That's all going to be very possible in n8n. And the way we're building it out, currently you could, in a function node, program a pause, but it's going to keep everything in memory. So that's not very scalable. What's going to happen with this wait node is if it's waiting for more than 60 seconds, we're going to save that execution state and be able to resuscitate that. So this is a lot more sort of a performant and a best practice way of thinking about waiting. So with that, obviously, depending on your configuration, you'll be able to start thinking about, how can hundreds of workflows get paused, snoozed, so to speak, and then resuscitated when it's the right time. So I'm really excited to hear about your use cases there. And as I said, that's being polished up. So that should be out sooner than later. Another big thing that we've been getting asked about is user management. As I've said previously, it's a very non-trivial feature. As you can imagine, we're basically touching almost every single part of n8n to realize user management. And so I wanted to just go into a bit of detail on basically what's the status there. So what I can't say today is it's going to be out on X date. Again, it's non-trivial, and our engineering team does things right. We don't rush out code just to meet some arbitrary deadline. What I can say is that what you'll be seeing in the next weeks is things related to user management coming out that isn't squarely user management. So what I mean by that is, since we're touching so many parts of n8n, we have decided to start improving our UI and bringing in a design system, which is going to allow basically for us as a team to have a lot less maintenance and really improve the quality of the interactions that you'll be experiencing. So one of the first things that'll be going out in the next weeks is the form inputs. And that's these little atoms that make up larger components that we'll be using in user management. We're rolling out globally because that's a really quick win. So I can actually share my screen, give you a quick sneak peek of these. It's nothing revolutionary, but if you're a longtime user of n8n, one thing that we sometimes hear are gripes about the color contrast ratios with form inputs, especially for people who maybe need a little bit of assistance or are hard of sight. So if I grab, for example, HTTP request node here, we can see we've made the inputs look less like buttons, and they no longer have a gray background, which means no matter which state they're in, especially in the disabled state, if you're looking at read-only execution, we now have much better color contrast there. So again, nothing revolutionary. And this might not seem like we're sort of moving towards user management, but all these little things that we'll be releasing are all requirements for this design system that we're bringing in as part of user management. So that's being actively worked on, and you'll start seeing sort of bigger chunks of this coming out. The next thing after this will be a credentials improvement to the credentials modal, which is also going to be sort of a big aspect in user management that changes. So the usability there should really improve. And then once that's out, we will be rolling out the V1 of user management, which will allow multiple users to coexist on an instance, potentially with sharing. We might even release without sharing done yet, just so we can support multiple users in an instance, which has been a big pain point for users. So while we don't have an estimate, know that we're working on it, and that we're sort of really using our product management muscles to try and get the value out to you as fast as possible and not wait for this big monolithic user management to come out. So I'm hoping in the next weeks, we'll start being able to give you better timelines on these things, but do be checking the new versions notification feature that came out a while ago if you haven't updated already, because a lot of these UX improvements and various things are going to be getting rolled out right before we do release user management. So that's just a snapshot of behind the scenes what we're working on. That's not everything, of course, but check the changelog for all various nodes and whatnot that have been updated. But that's just a bit of a behind the scenes from the product team here. And lastly, before I hand it off back to Harshal, I want to thank all of our engineers and all of our community members that are contributing things, because, you know, in product, it doesn't really help too much if there's no one to implement it. So thanks to everyone for realizing all these awesome features. Thanks.
Thank you, Max. That was wonderful. A quick reminder for all of you, I am collecting your questions and will be asking them after our next talk. So if you have any questions for Max, don't forget to share them in the chat. Moving forward, now getting any kind of output, whether it's a success message or an error message, is really helpful. It helps you understand what is going on. Omar, a senior full stack engineer, will talk about logs on n8n, how to identify possible problems. So Zoom is all yours, Omar.
Oops, we just had an issue in muting ourselves. Thank you very much, Harshal. Thank you everyone for joining. It's really a pleasure spending some time with you, talking about n8n and what we have been working on. So, well, let me share my screen. I have prepared a small presentation for us to go through. So if you're having any issues seeing this, please let me know. And okay, so, well, first off, who I am. So as Harshal already introduced, my name is Omar. I am one of n8n's senior software engineers. I was born in Brazil. I moved to Berlin to work for n8n recently. I just got to Berlin last December. And well, as a senior software engineer, I've worked in a few interesting projects in n8n. The scalability part, which we had some conversations about previously already, logging, and now working on some interesting projects as well related to the future of node building on n8n, more in the technical part. So some interesting stuff that we'll be coming to. So those are my contact information in case you want to connect. Feel free, please. So without further ado, let's go into what are logs. So just to set the level here, well, systems usually, logs are a way and messages that a system communicates with you to help you identify what is actually happening under the hood. So for instance, you can be using logs for tracking events that are happening, logging transactions that might be relevant to your system or to your business logic, maybe for audits, tracking requests that are happening to your system. So you can, for instance, count user usage and perhaps block access or check for malicious actions. So logs are basically a way of the system communicating what is happening, okay? So Logs can be written and generated in a big variety of formats. Some of the most common, like delimited with text, in case like you have a tabular structure of data, delimited messages, which is like CSV files, just plain text, like human readable messages, one line per instruction, JSON files, CSV that I already mentioned, Parquet, which is a format that is used by some of the Apache products for parsing and collection of data as well. So logs can be generated in a variety of formats, and the format that you're using logs, actually the chosen implementation will vary based on the use case that you'll be using, right? So in n8n specifically, how do we generate the logs? So we decided to use a JSON format for a few interesting points that it provides. First, well, n8n already uses this JSON extensively. So it's something that most of our users, if are not familiar with, will probably super quickly get in touch with and understand how it works and understand the structure. So it easily allows you to show and see data in variety of formats, lists of stuff, complex objects, nested information. So this is one of the reasons which we chose JSON, and also because it's becoming more and more popular for logs as more and more apps are using it, choosing logs for this. So this is the reason why we chose JSON as a format for n8n logs. So I'll go through some of the default settings in n8n. So one important point is that by default, to make n8n super lightweight and not take too much disk space, logs are turned off by default. So this is like to make it non-breakable as possible, like no breaking changes. So you can turn those on, and we'll go through that in a second. Unless you change the location, the logs will be saved inside your .n8n folder in a subfolder called logs. n8n will also do what we call log rotation, which means the file with the information will grow up to a certain size. When it reaches that size, n8n will automatically rename it and create a new one with the hot data. So you always have some sort of archive to go back to if you need. By default, again, n8n uses 16 megabytes per file and saves up to 100 files. So you have a very good history of information for this. Okay, so now that we know like how n8n generates logs and where they're saved, how are those log messages organized? What can I expect from the log messages that n8n generates? We created a simple structure that it's easier to read. So if you're now familiar with JSON objects, this will be super familiar to you. We use the level, which is one of those 5 options: error, warn, info, verbose, and debug. And we'll go through each one of those in a second. The message itself, which is usually a human-friendly message, we do our best to write messages that can be understood by anyone. So we write in plain text messages that help you understand what was happening. And there's also an interesting object, which we call metadata, which contains a timestamp. So basically when that action happened, the file and function where n8n was running at that time. And this really helps a lot when we need to debug something, if we have an issue with n8n. And also you can add additional data, like for instance, the ID of the workflow, the execution ID at the moment, the user session ID, and session ID in this case, I'm not saying like understanding who is the user, but actually simply a connection between the browser and n8n so that this information can flow. So it's not actually personalizing someone, it's impersonated data. It's not impersonated data. And so now what are the log levels? So error is the first and like most critical one, which means n8n is reporting some faulty behavior, which means something went wrong. Those messages are always logged. Usually, if you don't change any of the n8n settings, you will see those in your terminal. And we'll go through the settings in a moment, but those are always visible for you. Second level is warn, which means this is an important message, but not necessarily an error. This could be something like, hey, there's a library that was deprecated. There's information about some node that needs updating, for instance. So those kinds of messages that are important, that need your attention, are used as warn. And for general information like, oh, n8n started, n8n is listening to port XYZ, I don't know, webhooks have reached, so, some sort of information that is more, it's not an error, it's not a debug information, it's more like a general information overall. You have the verbals, which is actually n8n telling you everything it's doing. So for, I gotta remember that logs are messages that the developer add to the code. So whenever we as developers or engineers or you as a contributor decide to, hey, this is an important step that I want to check what's happening, you can naturally add those informations, and we'll talk about that too. So verbals is a way of telling you that we reached a certain point, maybe a checkpoint that is interesting, that helps you understand what is happening. And the difference between verbals and debug is that debug also contains more data about the current state. So verbals is like more an overview of where n8n is going, so where it's heading. And debug is really pinpointing with a bit more information, saying, hey, I'm specifically in this node and I'm taking this action. The operation is XYZ, for instance, I'm calling a certain resource. This is a way that helps you really understand exactly in detail what was happening at that moment. Okay. Now that we said about it, how do we set up logging for n8n? So basically, you would need to look at two different settings. The first one is the log level. It means, what do you want n8n to output? So these are like cumulative. So if you set error, only errors will be shown. But if you set warn, n8n will output errors and warn. So as a consequence, if you set debug, n8n will output all messages to you. So this is one easy way of letting you know, like, I want the most verbals one. It's actually like the debug. It might be a bit counterintuitive there. And the second most important setting is the output. So usually it's just console, unless you change it, which means information just being output to your terminal. You can set it to a file or both. So those are the three options that currently available. We would love to get more options in the future, but there are a few consequences to this, which are adding more dependencies to n8n, making the n8n Docker image or the app size bigger. And naturally, with external dependencies, we have problems with security concerns. So we decided for this moment to simply use file and console, which are super standard. And if you need to use an external system, you can set up your n8n to write information to a file. And there are applications that allow you to read information from a file and send to an external system, like Logly or Logstash, for instance, and a few others. Also, beyond those two those two settings that I mentioned, you can also set the file counts, which I mentioned in the beginning, 100 files. So you can change this number up or down according to your needs. The maximum size for each file, which is 16 megabytes by default, you can increase or decrease that. We chose 16 megabytes because it's a file that is long enough to store a good amount of data that you can read through and understand what's happening in a good period of time, but at the same time, not so huge that you would be unable to open it with like a regular text editor. And finally, the files location. So where do you want the files to be stored? So as I mentioned, they will be stored inside the n8n home folder, which is like the .n8n folder, inside a subfolder called logs, and the files will be called n8n.log. And when rotated, n8n-1-2-3.log. Some more information about logging, you can always go to the documentation. This contains the most up-to-date information. I'll leave this QR code here for a moment. So if you want, you can have a look there, but it's just n8n documentation. It's super easy to find. If you just type log or login in the search, you will easily find this link. And one important thing that is there that I will not be covering now is that this page also covers, if you're interested in contributing to n8n, how do you use the n8n tools to add log messages? To create more log messages. If you see, hey, I'm trying to diagnose something, to debug a specific situation, there are no log messages available at this time. So you can easily add more log messages, make a contribution to n8n. As you know, our source code is always open and contributions are super welcome. Well, let's touch a little bit about the logging best practices. So as I mentioned, logs are not saved by default. They are just output to your console. So my recommendation is to set n8n to save those two files so you can easily rely on those files in the future whenever you need to debug something or find a situation. This is super useful for us. Like if you're reporting an error on n8n, those log files can be super useful in those kind of situations. We do not expose any sensitive information. The log messages that we added so far do not expose any sensitive information, like credentials or so. They just try to really pinpoint what was happening, what are the resources and operations that were happening. So it should be safe to have those files. Although I would really recommend, if you're filing a report, please send those files privately, as this is the best way naturally. So if disk space is not an issue, I would really recommend to use the debug level. It's really the one that contains the most information, which is like the purpose of logs. But if you have space constraints or some sort of restriction, definitely you can set this level lower or use a debug, but set the number of files to be smaller. One another important thing is that, well, those are files. So they're stored in the file system and the hard disk. And if you're running n8n in a container, let's say, and you update n8n, so you spin up another container with an update, you lose the information in the previous container. So this is one of the reasons you should be using volumes, and this is described and in some examples on how to run n8n to actually map the .n8n folder from inside your container to your host machine, so that you don't lose this data in case the container changes. So also, if you're unfamiliar with this, please let us know. There are examples for this in the documentation. We can help you with this. And also, like, now that you have the files in your file system, it's easy to install external tools like daemons that will upload those files, those logs, to external tools like Logstash, Loggly, and CloudWatch. Like, these are super standard items. And remember, logs are your friends. They will help you in debugging and finding some useful information in a lot of cases. And we are adding more and more logs every time, so that n8n is each time more helpful in understanding what's going on and helping us to pinpoint issues. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share. I hope it wasn't too quick. And well, thank you.
All right. I just learned some Zoom shortcuts. So if you use Command, Shift, and V, you're going to turn off your video. I don't know why, what happened, but that's something I learned today. All right. Thank you, Omar, for sharing this. I am sure it's going to be useful for a lot of people. Now let's move on to the Q&A. And here's the first question. Let me just take a note. All right. So is there any possible way I can get n8n version inside n8n workflow, like in the function node or something? Omar, are you aware about
Yeah, n8n version, currently, no, I don't think so. There's an option to get that. Although we recently implemented a feature where n8n on startup will check for updates and let you know in the terminal if there's a new version available. So this is one easy way of seeing this, but I don't think from the workflow that's possible, like from a workflow to get the n8n version.
All right. I tried out something very recently, and if you have self-deployed n8n on your servers, you can use the execute command node and run the command n8n-v. So that would give you the n8n version that you are running. So that might be one possible solution if you want to check which version you are running.
Yeah, good point. I was thinking about expression, but yeah, that's a clever idea.
Max, I have the next question for you is how can we contribute to the UI?
Sure. So I guess that's a rather abstract question. So I would say when it comes to very large features, let's say you want to really tackle something, I think right now we're working internally on how to standardize things, the design system and whatnot. So I think it might be a little bit more difficult to be able to contribute that sort of way to the UI right now. When it comes to small things, I think some of the good examples that I've seen, for example, is and the best types I think today that are possible is when on perhaps a certain type of device, there's some clear bug in the UI. The expected functionality is very clear how it should work and it just isn't. That could be a great kind of UI sort of contribution. So a relevant example that happened recently is we're not officially supporting touch devices in terms of when we're doing our product process, doing exhaustive testing across lots of different touch devices. That's not to say that we're not happy if n8n does work on a touch device. I know there's a small subset of users that we've heard even like to be in the pool on the iPad, make workflows on a Saturday. We definitely want to empower that. So for example, if you do find a bug on some version of Android device where a button's not clickable, if you find a solution to that on the UI side and submit that, we'd happily review that and merge that and make sure that that's more usable. So I would say that's today the best way that users could contribute to the UI. And beyond that, I think in open source generally, effectively delivering coherent UI is one of these open questions that when I joined n8n, I was actually very interested in, how do we solve that? Is it possible to in public, just like we do with code, translate learnings from users into effective UI and whatnot? I think the best way that's going to work in future is starting small and getting bigger, right? I would say right now, our product team was one person, myself. That's now doubled. We're sort of figuring out on our internal process there. So I think how we think about bringing UI development process into the community is an open question. If you have any ideas on that, if you think there's a company that has done that very well, a project, please do email me, max@n8n.io, or on Twitter @maxtkacz, MAXTKACZ. I would love to hear about that, because I think in the long term, that would be something really cool if we could figure out sort of how to pioneer enabling that. So a bit of a long-winded answer there. To recap, on the small stuff, if you find bugs, please do submit those. We'd love to have improved coverage across all these different devices and screens that we're all using. On the bigger stuff, it's an open question that I do think on late Sunday nights and whatnot, in the long term, how are we going to empower our community to contribute there? So please do share if you have any ideas. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. The next one is for you, Omar. This is basically a suggestion, but I was wondering if there is a possible way to do this. So the user says would be very cool to have error logs emailed to a dev team. So with the current configuration, with the current options that we have in logging, is there a possible way of how we can do this?
I'm sorry, I just did not get it. What exactly was the suggestion?
So it would be really cool to have error logs emailed to the dev team.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, no. This would be something that would require us to implement a new logging driver, as it's called, to send the logs to an external, to another service. So currently, no. One possibility would be to watch the file and maybe send it to another way. But currently, no. Like the log outputs are just file and console.
Gotcha. Thank you. The next question is again for you. So running the Docker version, please remind me where we can turn on logs.
Sure. So I was scrolling through the chat messages, and John sent an interesting message here. Basically, if you're running the Docker version, you're probably using Docker run, some parameters, right? Some information about n8n, and lastly n8n Ajoue, so the Docker image. So you can also use environment variables in this. So those environment variables will be injected in your container. So you can use it's -e and then a space, the variable name equals the value. So you can use this to set the logging on in your container, in your n8n instance running inside a container. The logs will be saved to a file. So also remember to use a volume, which is the -v, to map the folder from the inside a container to a folder outside your container in your host machine, so you can save the log files as well. John sent a message. It's the n8n log level with an example on how he did this in his Docker Compose. If you're not using Docker Compose, it's you see a dash at the start of the lines. You should just replace that with -e, and it's pretty much the same thing. If it's not clear, please let me know. Send me an email. It's omar@n8n.io. I'll be glad to help.
Awesome. Another interesting feedback from a community member is, would be really nice to have config features per workflow that allows us to turn logging on or off when developing a workflow. That granularity would be useful so we don't have to turn logging on for the entire instance each time we need to dig into a single workflow. So is this again, something that we can do currently?
No, but that's a very interesting idea. Unfortunately, no. You can either turn logging on or off, like it's all or nothing. But that's a very interesting idea to turn on logging for just some specific parts of the system. That's a cool thing to think about. We should be adding this to our roadmap, logging on demand. Nice.
Awesome. Another question is, old logs will automatically get deleted or need to delete it manually?
Yeah, so they will be deleted automatically according to the log rotation settings. So if you don't change anything, n8n will store up to 100 files with 16 megabytes each. So when it reaches the 101st file, it will automatically delete the latest one and create a new one. So they're automatically rotated.
Awesome. And one last question is, when developing a node, how is the right way to log something?
Okay, so what we use when writing and creating log messages is log should be useful pieces of information for whoever is consuming the logs. So usually what we do is try to say what the resource and what the operations are running at that moment. If you have any other relevant information that might be tricky to diagnose, for instance, if you have to decide for choosing one path or another during the execution, and not to be so abstract, let's go to a more detailed instance. So if you have to add a property to a JSON or not, and this might change the outcome of the execution, those are useful information to add to a log file. So you say, hey, I'm at this node, I'm doing this operation on this resource, and I have this context, so I had to take this decision. So this is basically the goal of log files, to really pinpoint what's happening. And naturally, you can add more information like the execution ID, the workflow ID, maybe credential name, if you want to add that just as an informational thing, so you can see if it's using the right information. So overall, the idea is, what kind of information would you expect when reading those logs? So this is basically the thinking behind adding log messages. I hope it's clear.
Awesome. And I just shared the link of the documentation where we describe how you can implement it in the code. So you can refer to this documentation. And once again, if you face any problem or if anything is not clear, we are always happy to answer you on our community forum. All right, so let's move on to our next talk. And working on the intersection of sales and technology, Chris enjoys dabbling with no-code, Python, and open source. Today, he is going to talk about simple automations for the peace of mind. Take it away, Chris.
Unmute myself. Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much, Harshil. It's like I work in sales for a startup in payments. So right now we also have like quite an exciting times, which means a lot of growth pains, which are good ones to have. And we like try to use like n8n or automations and certain things that just make the overall life a little bit easier. These are mainly things that like remove like manual things that are easy to do. Like everybody can do this, but just like take away attention from the actual work you are doing. Take like 5 minutes, so it's not a big deal, but in the end it just sums up. And it's like things that can still require a lot of different small steps that have to be done in a super precise order. And I believe that when you have actually identified something like this, you must immediately automate it. So I have like one example here, and maybe I can share my screen. So here, and please let me know if you see the presentation as well.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. So talked about simple automations. The background, what we have done like in the past is there's a book that's quite popular. It's called Build to Sell. It's about like when you build like a company and you want to increase the value, it is better when everything is documented, everything is like actually running on clockwork, because when you have like a new owner, they actually have like a handbook and what they can follow it. So we started documenting a lot of the sales procedures we're having like in a pretty granular detail, whole onboarding flows of new customers, like everything in actually normal documents. So first, as a step, when, for example, somebody goes on vacation or somebody gets sick, that somebody can take over because they know in general what to do. And or also if you have like two people filling the same role, that there's not two flavors in the company, but like actually like a unified one. This is moved down to naming conventions of documents and also always all these other things, because you will identify like if things are missing, if things are not touched yet, easier when you have like consistency in folders, files, etc. We're like in fintech, so we have like also a lot of compliance documents, like things that need a like very like detailed view. So we have to pay like a lot of attention to process. This book describes it a little bit within, they call it SOPs and SODs. So the SOP is a standard operating procedure. Could be, for example, how do you issue an invoice? Yeah, what kind of steps actually need to be done? The way when you write down the process, it allows you to actually free up your brain, not needing to remember these things anymore. So what I usually do is also when I have like things that I know how to do because I actually created the whole thing, I still take the workflow and try to also improve it and reiterate over this. Sometimes these are things that I cannot automate. It's just like a step-by-step thing where I can which I can go through. And because I do a lot of context switching and different things, I just come out of a sales call, you have a team meeting, I talk with like something else. When I then have like an hour of time or something to focus on some work, it's just nice to have like this guidance. So it helps me like to stay on track and to actually get get better in the mode on working on this task. So the holy grail is, of course, when I can actually automate the whole process by technology. So when something is granular enough, or let's say is on a level where I can actually use tooling, then I would like to apply like a bit like a workflow with a tool like n8n so that I do not need to do the steps like manually. I can still survey them. So what we talked about right now, logging or the wait function, like the wait node, I'm very excited about this because I do have a lot of workflows where I do something and then I have to wait for external input before I can like move on. And some of these steps when I have the signal could also be something I can, let's say, that that can then trigger like a next automation instead of me picking it up and doing actually manual work. So some of the workflows I'm building, they're like more complex. It doesn't always need to be like this. So you can also just have like very simple things that actually also like have like already like a big input. So for example, one thing that we use is when we register, when we receive like a new lead, it's just simple things like creating a Google Drive folder for the client, creating like an Airtable entry, and we have to also add the Airtable, the Google Drive link into the Airtable entry. So this is really simple. It's just like simple as that. But if I would count up the steps, I didn't do it. Yeah. If I count up actually the steps that I have to do, it's like opening Google, clicking, going to the right folder in Google Drive, clicking, creating the thing, putting the right name in there, going to Airtable, loading the right thing. There's something wrong with the browser. It just like takes a long. I'm actually occupied for still like 5 minutes to get all of this done in the right way, and I have to create we have like create like several folders, like etc. just to follow like our process. So it's really simple work, but it just doesn't make sense because you have to be very focused on doing it, and the value add of doing this actually as a human is not really there. I still need it so the whole process can go on, but it's just it sounds simple. It is simple. Everybody can do it, but I believe like no one should do it if we can actually do all these things like with automation. So one of the other things is also that when we get like a new lead, this is like we're not in control on this. When we get the email, the phone call, the WhatsApp message, the Telegram one, Skype, yes, sadly Skype. When we actually have our trigger to do this workflow, yeah. So it is very distributed. It can come by different channels. So and maybe I'm not in front of my desktop where I can actually do these tasks. Maybe I'm just on my phone. Now creating like these things on a phone, like going in Airtable, like doing all these things, not very effective. So we're maybe like in the middle of a meeting, we're just like running short on some stuff. Or like it's like all relating, just like I say, okay, I'll do it tomorrow, create me like a Trello task to do this. Instead, what we created is actually like a / command in Slack. I am a big fan of chat ops in general. These are really great because we spend all our time in there. And I have my user interface with me on the phone. I have it like open on the desktop like the whole time. And it allows me to stay inside inside where I actually work instead of going now to open actually a browser. The other benefit of it is that because we use here the webhook to trigger it. Do I have my mouse? Sorry. You cannot see my mouse. Great. So we have like the webhook node, and it returns me actually actually we don't use the webhook node, but like we also post then after the workflow has been triggered like a message with the data into Slack. So when we look at this workflow here, I have to create like 3 folders. They're like nested in each other. So I have to like, it saves me already like a lot of clicking. We use the set node to make it a little bit easier to write the right information from the previous nodes into Airtable. And then we post the response into Slack. / commands in Slack, super easy to set up. So you can create an app and then on / commands, you can create like a new command. You can define it, give it like a name. You can give it like a little bit of a description. So when I'm inside Slack and actually start with /, I can have like some short documentation what I need to do. And from there, I can then just trigger the workflow, which just does all these simple steps. So we see this here. We have like register lead. I have created a format because I'm still a bit technical. So I have like the entity name, which is like the legal entity name. I have a semicolon. And after that, I have like a parameter that does already other stuff inside Airtable, given like these things. This already helps me a lot because I know the entry has been created. I know that all the manual things that are like very tedious have are done and sorted. And as a response, I get like a simple message back inside Slack, which links to me the Google Drive folder as well as the Airtable. So instead of going into Google Drive or into Airtable and entering all the stuff manually, all I have to do is now I click actually on the entry, and I can continue entering the information that that else I have, like about this lead, for example. Yeah. So this, of course, for me is like great, but it also has shown to be like very used by by my assistants, like and other people who are not so technical. They really embrace the slash commands as well. We use them for Trello task creation. We use it like for everything. And the nice thing is also that it resurfaces, like it makes the work also like visible. Yeah, so everybody's sort of in Slack in this way. This is like our operations channel. So it's always good to see that there we have like new leads, etc. So it's not, so we don't necessarily need to report like all of this, like what's been happening. Like people see, okay, we have like new stuff. And we like everybody's like sort of involved or updated on what is happening on this part of the business. Especially because we work like fully remote, or at least I do. This is like important for to keep like the information flow also going. And yeah, that's that on that part. One thing, how to get started. So building this whole thing took me like 2 hours from start to finish. I had to learn slash commands in Slack, sorry. I had to figure out how to create like a user for Google Drive, like a, what's that called? Like a service account. And I spent most of the time figuring out why the authentication doesn't work. And I just want to point this out. So read the fantastic documentation line by line, like a proper SOP like from n8n, from the n8n team, because there's like a bunch of funky stuff that is not so obvious if you don't read this. So I just want to point it out, this when you work with a private key, that's a like just follow what they say. Yeah, that actually concludes my presentation on this. Maybe I can go back. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderful. And yep, we often don't realize that we need automation until we have all these processes documented somewhere. So thank you so much for giving us this small reminder.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that it's you can start with something that is as simple as that. I mean, there are like working with the APIs, the nodes n8n already creates. It's like very, how to say, like it's very useful just to start with something, experiment. And especially like the webhook nodes combined with with Slack, and then returning like a response back there using a Slack node, like these little things are made super easy. I asked my like another engineer, like a real engineer, how long they would take like to build this workflow, and they quoted something from 1 to 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, this will never happen. Yeah. So it enables us a lot to do something here, and it's actually for the benefit of the people that don't get that much dev capacity, and just like makes work more enjoyable, and we can move faster.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So moving forward to our next talk, we have Tanay Pant, the head of developer relations at n8n. Tanay will be talking about how we automated a lot of our tasks around the new n8n beginners course. Over to you, Tanay.
Okay, give me a second while I share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So hey everyone, and welcome to my talk on how we built our first certification course. So over the last couple of months, we've been getting a lot of requests from the lovely n8n community about certification courses. And we thought about it and agreed that courses would be a great way to provide folks in the n8n ecosystem a coherent storyline and learning path. And moreover, people also get excited by certification, as that adds a nice incentive to the learning. So we decided to build a course. So we started thinking about what are the different elements of the course that we should take care of. So first of all, we wanted people to sign up so that we could track their progress through the different course milestones. And oftentimes we saw that people would try to go straight to the quiz and avoid going through the course milestones. And platforms like Coursera and Udacity deal with that by blocking the quiz section unless people have seen all the videos. So I thought, okay, maybe we should have something like that. Then content, of course, is the centerpiece of the puzzle here. And finally, there would be a quiz that the student would have to take. And if they pass, they would receive a certificate. Okay, so since content was the centerpiece of the puzzle here, we decided to host it alongside our docs. So we use ViewPress for documentation, and this way we wouldn't have to spend too much time building out a platform to host the content for the course. So here we mentioned that students would have to sign up, follow the 2 course milestones, and pass the quiz to get the certificate. So we use Typeform to power the sign-up form, and we'd ask for details like their full name as it would appear on the certificate and their email as well. So in the true spirit of no code, we decided to use Airtable as the database. So once they submit the form, it would store their details in Airtable and send them an email telling that they have successfully registered. Here we also check if the person have already signed up, in which case we send them the email with the original details rather than re-registering them. In the email that we send, we include a unique ID that the student would have to use during the workflow building exercises so that we know that they have finished the milestones. Now, if you store a record in Airtable, it automatically generates an ID for each record. And we have just used that as the unique ID here. And this is what the Airtable looks like. Every time somebody signs up, finishes a milestone, attempts the quiz, which by the way is also a type form, we note the date and time of when they did it. We also store the score of the last attempt that the student did. And we also store some other details like their name and email, which of course I've omitted here. And this helps us in a couple of ways. So this is the first time that we have built a course, and we want to make sure that people can go through this smoothly. And in case we notice that somebody has been stuck at a certain milestone, let's say for a week or 2, we can reach out to them automatically to see if they need any help. So what happens when you submit the quiz? So at the end of the course, we had to do a couple of iterations for this as different people approach the course in different ways. And here we are pretty much making sure that we have covered all the edge cases of how a person can finish a course. And once they finish the milestones in the course and pass the quiz with more than 80%, they would get this email. And we generate this LinkedIn certification button, which autofills certificate details after clicking on LinkedIn, as well as provide them with a PDF of the certificate. And we are using a tool called API template to generate the certificate. And that is how we build the course. And at this point, we thought that we were pretty much finished, but we really underestimated the number of students who would try to directly attempt the quiz without finishing the course milestones. And we ended up getting a lot of support questions where people didn't check out the requirements to get a certificate. And Harshil and I would have to look at the Airtable and see like, why is it that they did not get the certificate, and reply to them. And then at that point, we thought, why not automate this as well? So we created an endpoint where the student would enter their unique ID. So this is a web page, and it would show their progress to them. We figured that since we have this information, why not make it available to them so that they can just check it themselves? So this is an example scenario that I created. So here the person sees like they haven't finished the course, and the reason they haven't gotten the certificate is in the workflow section of the quiz, they got only 34% as opposed to greater than 80%. So they know they need to retake the quiz. This is another example where the person has finished the quiz, they've passed it, but they miss notifying the team where they have to send a Discord message. So when they come here, they can understand like, okay, this step is missing, and this correlates with the name of the chapter in the course. So once they send out the message to Discord, they'll get their certificate ID. And this is what it looks like. And I stole this from Harshil, who successfully took the course. And in LinkedIn, you also have this field called credential URL. So this is typically used by platforms to verify that the credential that a person is claiming is real. So we use the unique ID here as well, and we can then verify that, yes, the credential that a person has put on LinkedIn is actually original, and they can download the certificate from here as well. And finally, we decided to create a funnel-like thing to visualize how many people end up earning the certificate. And this also helps us understand where people are dropping out, which in turn helps us prioritize improvements that we have planned for the course. So this is a screenshot from the chat tool that we internally use called Mattermost, which is an open source alternative to Slack. And if I use /core/command in Mattermost, it gets the data out of Airtable, except the ones with the n8n.io email addresses that we have used for testing. And it uses a platform called Quick Chart, which you can send HTTP requests to create the bar chart. And our certification course is live at docs.n8n.io/courses. And since you have gotten a sneak peek of the inner workings of the course, perhaps you'd like to go through it yourself and share your experience and feedback with me. And we soon plan to do a more detailed write-up and share all the workflows that we have built to power this course in the coming weeks, so that in case you would like to create a course like this, you could reuse those workflows as well. Well, that's all for today. If you have any questions, feel free to send them along in the chat. And as always, you can reach out to me at tanay@n8n.io. And I look forward to see what you all build.
Wow, those workflows look really good. Thank you, Tanay, for sharing them and telling how we are using n8n to track the progress of the students while they're taking the course. So thank you everyone who joined in, and thank you to all our speakers for taking out their time and sharing the knowledge. We are moving towards the end of our meetup. We will start with our office hours, where you can ask questions and interact with the speakers and the n8n team. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please share them in the chat. We got a question around the course, Tanay. Which API are you using for generating the certificate? I see you already answered that. Perfect. Just to give a bit more context, Victor, over here, we have a node for API template.io. So all we have to do is select which template we want to use and then specify all these, all the dynamic parameters in the node. All right, while we have questions coming in from the people, I have questions for you all. Which language did you learn recently? I would really like to know which language you learned recently. I like John's reply. All right, so we have people who are learning Kotlin, people who are learning TypeScript, German, Spanish on Duolingo. That's wonderful. Python and JavaScript. That's awesome. Oh, wow, okay. We got a lot of new languages and JavaScript, PHP, Malay. That's awesome. All right, people. Thank you for answering that. I'm gonna wait for a couple of more minutes to see if we have any questions from the community for our speakers or for our team. It's not big time in China, and there are very good reasons for it. Interesting. Nice to know. I'm gonna search about that later on. Then there is a question for you. Are you planning for advanced n8n courses?
Yeah, so our team is working on level 2 for the course right now. And we also have level 3 planned. So that's something that's upcoming in this quarter. So we cover more advanced concepts as well, and other things that help, which can help set you up for success in terms of workflow building and everything around n8n.
That's awesome. All right, so this was wonderful. Once again, thank you everyone for joining in. Let's continue our conversation over to Discord. Now, if you are not on our Discord server, I'm just sharing the link in the chat. You can join us on our Discord server and let's continue our discussion over there. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care. Bye.